Zoom call too. But welcome everyone in the room and in Colorado, wherever you are. Glad you can join us. We're also recording this. We had a few people who I think can't watch now, but it'll be recorded, and then we'll share that. But we're looking. Hi, welcome. There are chairs. We just got to pull them out and start making a second row. As I've been sharing in worship, we're studying the 5 major religions except for Christianity for these 4 weeks, and we're going to start. I'm attempting to do basically chronological order on which ones are the oldest to the newest, and so that means our first one is Hinduism, which is the oldest of the 5. We're going to be looking at them as much as a person who's not a total expert can teach on them in terms of their beliefs and practices, some of their histories, some of the outlook on life. One of the challenges of ever doing that is when you're talking about any of the world religions, you're talking about a billion plus people in many cases. And so, one of the things about religions is they're kind of collections of people who are largely similar, but not exactly the same. So I'm going to try to take some of the most representative forms of these faiths and kind of say, here's in general how this religion works. But when there's big exceptions, I'll try to offer some of those as well to acknowledge some of the diversity. Another thing I want to do is explore the religion from the perspective, maybe at least 2 of them. One is the beauty in the logic of itself. Why is it that over 1 billion people are attracted to one religion or another? So instead of saying, here's why it's right or wrong, just kind of say, here's how it tells its own story and describe as much as one could these religions as they would describe themselves. I also am going to do a little bit, and maybe this can be a discussion in each religion, to talk a little about what have been some of the challenges in these faiths, because all faiths, including Christianity, have had challenging periods, still have challenging elements. And so we are going to talk about that a little. And one of the things I invite you to consider, kind of a core question, is, are all the major religions fundamentally the same, or are they essentially very different, or some mixture of the 2 of these things? Another question, and this is maybe a related question, is, are they all different paths to the same God and the same truth, or are they in some ways opposing paths with different gods and different truths? I'll tell you now, I'm not going to answer the question, but we're going to ask the question, and you all can help to answer as you see it. So again, today we're going to start with the oldest religion, which is Hinduism. And we're actually going to begin with a short video of a lady who knows more about it than me, who's going to give us kind of a primer. So those on Zoom, I think I'm able to share my screen here. So give me a second and tell me if you see it when it begins. Let's see.
Behind you.
Share screen. And then Hinduism. And then share sound.
It's pretty good.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you see that?
Yes.
All right. Well, here we go. It's about a 6-minute video. I think the last part's not, I might skip the last 30 seconds or so, but here's a lady talking about the basics of Hinduism. I'll get out of the way of the screen.
Hey everyone, welcome back to this series about world religions. We are exploring religions from a historical lens and celebrating the uniqueness we find in each. Again, not all religions are the same, but there are similarities you can draw on each of them. There are also huge differences that we negate if we don't understand their background. Think of it this way: M&Ms and Skittles. Yes, they are similar, and they're both candy and roundish, but to say they're the same misses out on the uniqueness each candy has to offer. We want to explore differences and celebrate the goodness of the chocolate. Hashtag Team M&M. So let's look at Hinduism today. Hinduism is one of the world's oldest religions, and it started in South Asia, which is in the area of modern-day India and Pakistan. Many historians say the belief system emerged in the Indus River Valley around 4,000 years ago. The tricky part about Hinduism is there's no specific founder, and often is a combination of many traditions and philosophies, starting with the Aryan people who migrated to South Asia and brought in the Vedic beliefs. Think of Hinduism as very flexible. Unlike other religions are more strict with their beliefs, this one is flexible. Here's a good example. When thinking about deities or who God is, there are various Hindu beliefs. Many historians would say it is polytheistic, and they believe in many gods. Poly meaning many, theism talking about the study of God. So many gods. Although many Hindus would say they're henotheistic, which means they worship a single deity known as Brahman, while not denying that other gods exist. And then others would just say that they are having lots of different people like Shiva and Vishnu or Krishna, the god of compassion and love, are just manifestations of that ultimate god, Brahman. To learn more about these different deities, you can read any of the Hindu sacred writings, which again isn't a single book. The primary book is the Vedas, which among them is the Rig Veda, which is one of the most popular of this. The Vedas transcend time, as they would say, and they don't really have a beginning or an end, as they are referring to the ultimate truth. We do not know who wrote them. Hindus worship in temples, but they also worship at home, where they often have a small shrine with pictures and a statue, perhaps, dedicated to a god or a goddess. Brahmins are a class within Hinduism who are often the priests or the teachers. Today, many Hindu leaders may be known as priests or gurus, and a follower of Hinduism is known as a Hindu. Over the years, I have heard many strange things meet up, like a Hinduist, but no, it's Hindus. So let's break down the major beliefs of Hinduism. There's some good vocab words, so get your pen ready for these. Hindus believe in the doctrine of samsara, which is the continuous cycle of birth and death and reincarnation. They also believe in karma, which is the universal law of cause and effect. Good karma means that your good deeds will cause you good things, whereas bad karma says that a person's wrong acts will eventually catch up to them. Hindus focus on living out their dharma, which is their place or duty in life. It focuses on people living out their morality in all aspects, regardless if they don't like their job or their position in society. Now, the ultimate goal is release from the cycle of samsara. This escape from samsara is called moksha. It is where a person's soul becomes part of the absolute soul, being once again Brahman. The caste system is a social hierarchy in India that divides Hindus based on their karma and their dharma. The four main castes or classes are Brahmins, which are the priests or the teachers, the Kshatriyas, which are the protectors or government workers, the Vaishyas, who are the skillful producers, and again the Shudras, who are the unskilled laborers. I will say there is contention about the caste system. Some Hindus say that the caste system isn't a part of the reincarnation process. Others say the caste system is just a way to create social order in society. People who fell in love with different castes were not allowed to marry each other, and I wonder if there's an Indian version of Romeo and Juliet. Additionally, to add in, the classes of the untouchables, if you've heard of that, is not mentioned in the Rig Veda. So today, technically, the caste system is illegal, and now that they are an independent nation in India. Now, similar to Judaism, Hinduism isn't technically a universal religion where they seek converts. Hindu beliefs are diffused and are spread because Hindus themselves move. Initially, these beliefs spread throughout the Indian Ocean basin and a little bit to Southeast Asia. Additionally, most Hindus are Indians, so that's where Hinduism was. In regard to gender roles, Hinduism is very patriarchal in societal terms. Historically, marriage was more arranged in Hindu families where fathers would give their daughters away with little to no say to females. There's an old custom where female widows would commit suicide after their husband's death. This wasn't a widespread custom, but the idea that women were a nuisance and couldn't provide for their family tells us a little bit about their place in society. However, many deities within Hinduism are female, while Brahman, the ultimate being, is seen as genderless. We could totally dig into so much more about this, but I hope this gives you a good overview of Hinduism. Thanks for tuning in. If you find this information helpful, give us a like, subscribe below, and also check out the other videos in this series about world religions.
Right. Someone grab that light.
Hey everyone, welcome back to this series.
We already spoke.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions about any of that? Yes, Ray.
I was wondering, uh, uh, when do they start? Because this the world's oldest religion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what about the Jewish religion? I mean, that starts when the earth was created, and there couldn't be anything before that.
Well, the myth story does, but if you think of like what defines a Jew, their father's Abraham, and so he has a link traditionally to a certain era, which is probably after, based on the city that's mentioned and stuff.
Okay.
Probably after some of this. Yeah. And we will talk about Judaism. That'll be our,
And are
it's the third one.
indigenous spiritual beliefs just not counted because it's not organized?
Well, I'm
they-
just doing the largest
No,
ones.
I
Yeah,
know, I
yeah,
know.
yeah. But I mean, no, they count. The hard thing about talking about indigenous beliefs is because every area would have their own. So it's sort of, you could talk
Like
about,
Chickasaws
what
and
is
the
that?
Pueblo would have different gods. Or
Exactly. Yeah. Even in North America and certainly around
And they
the
don't
world.
write it down.
Yeah, so technically, if that's, I think what you're getting at, is that you could say Hinduism is the oldest major religion, but there certainly were indigenous ones that predated.
That's right.
Is that what
We're
you're
talking about the
getting
Yeah,
oldest
yeah.
major, what we regard as the five.
Like
world
people
religions.
just didn't all of a sudden wake up to be Hindu and they didn't have any beliefs before
Yeah,
that.
right.
Right?
No, and in
Yeah.
fact, Hinduism probably grew out of traditional religions that gained enough texts and traditions that became a distinct thing as opposed to just another, it never, the early things don't say we're Hindus, they're just religious practices. So maybe some of this will come out in the wash too.
Not to cut you off, but I had another question.
Yeah, but please.
What would define something as a religion?
Yeah. Yeah, so there you go.
But
Well,
good.
so
That's a question.
this is a
Yes,
great
yeah,
question.
yeah.
And
How
even
many
within our
different
study,
ones
we're gonna
No.
see like one of the world religions doesn't highly or at all emphasize belief in God,
Right.
Buddhism, right? So like a Christian, a Muslim would, Jewish person would traditionally say, well, God's the biggest focal point of all religion. And yet a Buddhist would say, no, it's not necessary for us. So maybe you could say some sort of system of practice and higher meaning, a sense of seeking out a transcendence, a meaning bigger than just the mundane. But I'm just kind of throwing stuff out there. But some definitions are then going to say connection to God, understanding of God, theology, and others are going to say, no, that's not important. We don't believe in that, or even if we do, it's not important. So yeah, what do you guys think? What makes a religion?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So because sometimes something like Buddhism, for example, is not always considered to be a religion. It's more of a tradition.
Yeah.
For amongst people who practice. So and Judaism is, although it's a religion, it's also considered a lifestyle or
It's a race. It's an identity. Some people call themselves Jew, very modern ones, secular ones, do not necessarily believe in God. And I guess when I'm talking about Judaism, we're not doing it yet, but it'll be from the original religious tradition, but probably we'll touch on that about how, some of them just, it's like we want to continue some of the meal traditions and the identity, but we're not into the theistic part. So that's a great question. And I think it's kind of a question with many answers and no one answer. I'd say there's enough of a sense in the word religion of like higher transcendent purpose, but how that plays out is very up in the air, and that would be maybe a good example of, the idea all religions are the same. Yes, and no, because they're coming up with different explanations. And
so it's maybe just how we as people across the globe during over many eras define it. If we just say
Sure.
it is, and then it is.
Yeah,
There's no specific definition.
And the last thought is today we think of like the secular and the religious world. Before the last few hundred years, it was so integrated with daily life that there was really, everything was religious. Who you married was religious, how you prayed was religious, the blessings you did on your, so like there's a modern thing too, where how we think about it is very different than how ancient people thought about it as being entirely integrated. Whether there's rain today is religious, when I'm doing my farming. So, yeah. Okay, so let's keep on going. So, and I'm going to repeat a lot, but it'll go a little slower, and we could, take questions as we go. But as she said, Hinduism, if you want to call it founded or its evolution, comes out of India, the area of India, Pakistan, somewhere in there, between 3,500 and 4,000 years ago. When you read about scripture, if you want to call it that, in the Hindu tradition, they'll talk about Vedic texts. When you see the word Vedic is a time period in ancient Indian history. So what it's talking about is in the Vedic era is just to say the Indian era, kind of like if you've ever heard of Mesopotamia or the dynasties of Egypt, like this is or the king era in the dynastic era in Israel. This is a particular era in India. So the Vedic period of Indian history is where the beliefs that become called Hinduism emerge. I attempted a summary statement based on things she shared and what others shared too. But to talk about what it is in its broadest sense, maybe most agreed upon sense, the goal of Hinduism is liberation from the cycle of rebirth. So liberation on the one hand, and then reunification with the absolute through good karma and transcending the illusion of the separate self. So that's a lot, but good karma gets you there. And part of that is recognizing the illusion of the separate self. So a big concept in Indian theology, or I should say Hindu theology, is that, we see ourselves all separate, and there's a bird and there's a person and there's different people and there's a table, but that's actually an illusion. Underneath it all, the reality is one. And so the higher forms of being, the higher forms of understanding would be to either fully or in part start to recognize the oneness of all things. Conception of God. So this is one of the interesting ones where it gets hard to talk about Hinduism in the singular. Hinduism is generally referred to as a polytheistic religion, meaning many gods, deities. In fact, there's a Hindu tradition that says there are as many as 33 million gods, right? So very polytheistic. However, some Hindus hold that, yes, that's the surface level belief, but that the many gods are avatars, which is a word for like faces, masks, manifestations of the one absolute, or that there are many, you might call them in Christianity, angels, supernatural beings, but that there's one creator God above all of those. So those three versions of it all exist within Hinduism, kind of a theistic Hinduism, a polytheistic Hinduism, and a sort of polytheistic, but with one head creator God above them versions of Hinduism. Some of the major gods mentioned in Hindu texts, there tend to be the three big ones they're all men, but Brahma, the creator, at least they're depicted as male, but they'll talk about how they're genderless too. But Brahma, who's the creator, Vishnu, who's the preserver, and Shiva, who's the destroyer. That's the funnest title. We don't have a creator, sustainers. What is it? A creator, redeemer, sustainer. They have creator, preserver, destroyer. So a slightly different trinity. And then they have feminine counterparts, Saraswati, who's the goddess of arts and learning, Lakshmi, who's the goddess of wealth, fortune, and prosperity, and Pavarti, who's the god of power, beauty, and motherhood. One of the ways to think about Hinduism is sort of this sense of there are forces in the world, and each force that could be good for you or bad for you is represented by a god, right? Which is actually a really common, if you go to like pagan Roman beliefs, that's very similar kind of mindset. The god of fertility, the god of money, the god of all kinds of stuff. I didn't do handouts for everyone, but if you guys want to pass around, this kind of shows here's some depictions of the three major gods. Brahma, who you'll notice has lots of faces, right? This idea of lots of realities to the one. Vishnu, who has lots, actually, they all have lots of arms. Vishnu and Shiva. And then on the other side, here's again kind of a god with many faces and many arms that kind of gets into that fuzziness of one god or one god with many faces. That's kind of in Hinduism, the flexibility is kind of emphasized. And then just a shrine where you can see just a multitude of idol figures representing different gods. So if you guys want to pass that around, you could just kind of get a sense of some of the.
Real quick question.
Yeah.
You mentioned pagan religions. How does this differentiate from a pagan religion?
Yeah, well, in pagan's just a term for technically, people call themselves pagan today, but pagan meant religions that were not Christian in the ancient Roman world. So like
So
Visigoth
strictly a
and
Christian.
Roman stuff. And then people use it differently, but that's kind of what I meant was the historical usage.
So
of the
would
term.
a Christian consider this to be a pagan religion?
They've considered everything to be pagan, other than maybe Judaism, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Somebody said. Okay, so some core beliefs we're going to explore. One is the illusion of the self, and we talked about that. According to Hindu belief, we're all part of what they'll say is Brahman. This is, if there's going to be a head god, a lot of times they'll talk about Brahman, the creator god. So what we perceive as our individuality is an illusion, and our inability to see past, if you want to talk about like the doctrine of sin in Hinduism, our inability to see past the illusion of separateness is what causes all folly and greed and human suffering. So that's a big thing, right? We're all one, but we don't realize it. So we do stupid things. She talked also in the video about reincarnation, which the Hindu term is samswari, which is that all living creatures are in a, so not just humans, but all living creatures are in a cycle of rebirth that is dictated by our good and bad deeds. And that links us to a very common term in American usage, karma, right? We know that word, but that's actually something that really flowed from Hinduism as a popular belief, is the idea that there's a balance sheet of our good and bad deeds, and that sort of what you put out into the universe comes back at you, right? Bad deeds are going to hurt you. Good deeds are going to help you. However, in Hinduism, it's not just a vague sense of helping and hurting, it's rebirth. If you do bad deeds, your state in rebirth is going to be lower. If you do lots of good deeds, you will be elevated in your cycle of rebirth, possibly all the way to the top if you do enough good lives in a row. And that leads us to the caste, also known as she called the Varna system, which is that human beings are divided into different levels, i.e. castes, that reflect where they are in the cycle of rebirth based on, remember, not their current so much, but their past life's karma. So these castes include the Brahmins, who are priestly people, the highest caste, the I don't know how to say this, Kshatriyas or Rajanas, who are rulers, administrators, and warriors, the Vaishyas, who are artisans, merchants, tradespeople, and farmers, and the Shudras, who are the laboring classes, kind of the working class. What's interesting is that's where the castes end, and then there's a caste who aren't part of the caste, and that's where you get the untouchables. So they're so low, they're not even included in the castes. And so they're by those who hold to the caste system, they're considered entirely outside of Varna's scope, just really, really bad. Also, not only could you go down or up all the way down to untouchable, it's held that maybe a fly is like a really nasty person in the past. So there can be some of that understanding on animals too. The highest goal, the highest state is liberation, moksha. The goal of Hinduism is to escape the cycle of rebirth and achieve total union with Brahman, i.e. God, which is the state called moksha. And those in moksha are seen to have transcended the illusion of the separate self, and again, total oneness with the absolute, however they understand the absolute, whether it's many gods or just the one Brahman. There are also in Hinduism, there's a teaching called the Four Proper Aims of Life, and they all have their place, but they're ranked. So moksha is the highest, which is, total spiritual transcendence, reunification. Dharma, which is sort of a moral life. And she talked about karma and dharma. So karma's the good and the bad, and dharma is the word for your ethical life. There's Artha, which is kind of the materialistic thing, being prosperous, having a good job, security, a means. And then Kama, which is bodily stuff, right? Pleasure, sensations. So they're all, none of them are demonized, but moksha is the best. Dharma's the second best, Artha. So the pleasures are less elevated than if you've also taken care of your other things on the aims of life. I'll stop there for a second. So those were some of the major beliefs. What kind of questions or thoughts do we have? Yeah.
If for some strange reason you were demoted after you passed away and your new life was a fly,
Yeah.
how do you ever get out of there? How can you do good and
Be a
do
good
better?
Be a good fly. You'd be a good fly.
Or a worm, or,
Make
you know,
sure you take care of all the
Worm.
droppings that are, so we don't step in them. So yeah,
Unless-
I don't know. I
you're
get it. Yeah.
doomed to be a fly until you're not,
Yeah, I think
or
the
a
idea is you
worm,
gotta,
or a mosquito,
yeah.
or.
And part of it too, on the human level, one of the teachings is you have to
That's
accept
blasphemy.
your place. Because your place is your righteous punishment for your life. And so if you're a lowly person, you need to not fight against that, because fighting against that
But
would
you can be
fighting against-
reborn, and I'm like.
Yeah, so like accepting it and being very servile would be a good, you know, if you're
And
like.
wait
low-
and see.
Yeah, and hope
It's,
you get,
it's,
you.
I wouldn't be a good Hindu.
No, you wouldn't. I don't think so. Yeah.
When you're reborn, do you know what you were before you were reborn?
No, not necessarily, but there's this idea. I mean, yeah, this is where you get the multitude of views, right? It's kind of the classic hippie idea, but it really, all the hippie stuff, if you know your 60s and the Beatles and the Maharishi, that was going back to Hindu stuff. I feel like in a former life, yeah, some of you were around, right?
Doug is waving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yell at me if you guys want to talk. I might miss you, so speak up if you have something to say. But yeah, so that's kind of playing on that. Yeah, I feel like in a former life, and you could go see a psychic now, and they'll tell you about your former life. So there are those who claim they figure that out, or there's some who might just say where you are now tells you where you were in your former life.
Could I be a Hindu and not know it? I mean, could this be another life that I'm in?
Oh, sure. If you're a Hindu, then you'd say yes,
Well,
because
no, but I'm not a
maybe
Hindu, but
you were just really ignorant in your last life. So you're even more ignorant. Just kidding. I don't. Well, a Hindu would say we're all absolute, you know, it's all one reality. And so if you don't know that, that's just your own ignorance. So I don't know if that makes you a Hindu, but it makes you part of the
Are you
one.
asking, Ray, if a Hindu was reincarnated, could they come into a non-Hindu?
As a
body?
Christian, come
As
back.
a Christian, I don't know. I don't know how that.
You'd get another, when does that rebirth stop? You'd get another chance,
Well, you have
right?
to reach moksha,
Oh,
and then it
How
stops.
do you do that?
and who
You
determines
get
that?
you're really good. Live
Does it
really
matter?
good lives.
So it sounds like moksha is their equivalent of heaven.
Yeah, mokshas have. The thing I haven't been able to find, and this would be Homer, if any of you, so Brahmins who are an actual human state, there are Brahmins in the world. I don't know if they're considered in total moksha because they're still in the world, or if they're like pre-moksha and then they'll go to heaven. I haven't figured that out. Like, does being alive mean you're not totally in moksha because you should be in sort of absolute
Wouldn't be
heaven?
here, yeah.
Yeah, or is that, yeah, they're in moksha and they're here in this world being awesome. I'm not sure how that view is. Yeah.
Oh, so one of my colleagues was a Brahmin.
Okay.
And he was awesome.
Was he in moksha?
I don't know. I didn't ask him.
Okay, yeah, that'd be a weird question.
He was a cool guy and a geologist, so.
Interesting, yeah.
I'm struck by what she said about the women in the society or
Yes.
whatever, and this religion isn't any different than some others. So you have goddesses, and look at what they are representing: arts, prosperity,
Money,
money,
Beauty.
yeah, and whatever else it was, and yet,
Women aren't valued.
right, and that's so undervalued that you'd go kill yourself because.
yeah, well, some of the
Husband.
most intense forms of
Isn't
patriarchy,
that
you can find. Honor
crazy?
killing is a thing, though it also is an Islamic culture in that area, so one could question whether it's fundamentally religious or there's culture under it, or a little of both. I
But my
don't know.
point is, why would you raise up women
Yeah.
as goddesses and then,
Not valued among.
and then,
Because men did it.
that's exactly
Yeah, almost
right.
like men were in charge, I don't know. Yeah,
Maybe, that's
Yeah,
just
no,
so
there's always
crazy.
that
I don't know
tension.
why people's heads don't blow up.
yeah.
Really.
So when you turn into a fly, you've really gone Yeah.
I know, well,
I did love it.
but I want to weigh
But the
out.
other question too is, I don't know if this is, there's a color thing too in that caste, isn't there? Isn't the darker
there's-
skin you are, the
I
lower?
think I've heard that, but I didn't research that. I don't wanna.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
that there may be a racial,
So-
but I think there's definitely an ethnic, like, it's not just like, oh, you seem like a bad, but it's like your family, your whole family is, and that's where you get to kind of the hopelessness of it, that even their kids are still untouchable. So are we really measuring whether they're good, or are we just saying a group of people's bad forever, and impressing them? Gandhi, for instance, did not like the caste, thought the caste was a
Right.
perversion of Hinduism. So you can't say all Hindus believe in the caste, and they actually, as she mentioned, it's not legal, but I think often it's enforced not through law, but through just cultural practice. If you can't marry them, or
Racist.
you can't get
Yeah,
a job,
it's racism,
so even if it's not legal, it can still be very pernicious, and people can still do awful things. I think I need
Doesn't
to,
every society have something like that?
no, ours is perfect. Yeah,
Oh, really?
exactly.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. I have a lot more, so I'm gonna keep
Okay.
on going. I'm sorry. Places of worship, she already mentioned that there's Hindu temples. One interesting thing is that though as a Christian, I would never say you're a better, you're only good if you go to church. There's certainly a strong culture in Christianity of collective corporate worship. In Hinduism, there's really not that necessarily. Many Hindus only have the home shrine. They may now and again, if they really want, feel the need, go to a temple and say some prayers. They may go see a guru they really like at a temple, but you may not too. You may just always do your little home shrine with an idol, and that's perceived by many Hindus as that's perfectly fine, never to necessarily worship in a group. So they don't have like a Sunday in the way we do. There's not a particular time they come and worship. Mentioned home shrines already, often with a little idol and different things around it. Gurus, also known as yogis, are seen as wise, usually men, wise men who teach. They might be at schools, spiritual centers, temples. And then some core practices. Meditation, contemplation is big in Hinduism. It's called dhyana. It's for the purposes of wisdom, self-knowledge, deeper spiritual insight. So if you think of one of the core ideas is there's the absolute oneness, and we think we're separate. So it's a practice to try to put yourself in touch with the oneness, to get rid of the distractions. Mantras, again, kind of has permeated our language, right? Holy phrases, words, sounds, usually in an Indian language, that are believed by practitioners to have religious, magical, or spiritual powers. Some of them are mentioned in their scriptures. Individuals or groups of Hindus can recite mantras as practices of ritual, mental centering, or spiritual devotion. And then another word that's permeated, yoga. Yoga comes out of Hinduism. So a group of not just necessarily mental and spiritual, but physical practices and disciplines that are meant to control the mind. And they originated in ancient India. Writings and scriptures. So there are different forms of Hinduism observe different texts, but there's some core ones. The Vedas, as she mentioned, are the oldest and most highly regarded texts. They include mantras, benedictions, so kind of blessing type things, ceremonies, rituals, less theology and more like prayers and scripture and proverbs. They discuss some meditation, philosophy, spiritual knowledge. I thought I pulled a couple examples of what they say. So here's one quote: "The truth is one, the wise call it by many names." So there's that idea, one absolute. Another one should perform karma with nonchalance without expecting the benefits, because sooner or later one shall definitely get the fruits. So again, just put your head down, live a good life. Don't ask for anything. You'll be rewarded in the end. Another one, who really knows and who can swear how creation came, when or where? Even gods came after creation's day. Who really knows and who can really say when and how did creation start? Did he do it or did he not? He, I think God. Only he up there knows, maybe, or perhaps not even he. So that's one of the things about Hinduism, a little more, who knows, right? Flexible. There's some sort of absolute reality. Who knows about it? Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple of others. There's one called the Upanishads, which are less rituals and more, then you get more religious ideas, institutions, discusses meditation, philosophy, consciousness, philosophical knowledge. And then another one called the Itihasa, which are accounts. So these are like historical / mythical accounts that are important in Hinduism. So think of kind of, we have our King David and our patriarchs. That's kind of their version of that. Cosmology stories, mythology stories, how things came to be, dynasties, stuff like that. Quick question before we just have a little more. Yeah.
So I think I'm picking up on, they have a sense of up there versus down here. Is that?
Yeah, and if not up and down, then certainly real and illusion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I don't want to totally say that's wrong, up and down, but yeah, the absolute and the
realm.
thing we think we see, yeah, the illusion.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Do they have a book like the Bible, like that we have?
They have a collection of books
Do-
that
do-
are
do they?
kind of like the Bible, but they're more flexible. So like the Vedas, most Hindus, but actually I mentioned 3, there were several. And so
Okay.
because it grew out of a culture, and I don't know that it was ever put in one book per se, it's a little more loose, and Hinduism's a little more loose. So they don't maybe mind as much that there's,
Yeah,
we like this book, we don't, but we all like the Vedas kind
so
of
there
thing.
is some books available.
Yeah, you can go to the library and buy the Vedas, or I'm
Okay.
sure there are collections of like multiple
Yeah,
sacred writings in
yeah,
Hinduism.
okay.
Yeah, I don't own it, but yeah.
It's not really a religion, but how do modern day folks sometimes, I don't like organized religion. I'm more agnostic.
Uh-huh.
So there is a supreme power,
Yeah,
but it's sort of seems vague, like the Hindus kind of.
yeah, and it's so I'd say like modern secular spiritual types, they tend towards Hinduism or Buddhism because they're both kind of flexible. You get your meditation stuff. If you want, you can have a god or gods. If you want, you can do more the Buddhist route without a god, and you can kind of, it's a little more of a self-spiritual path and less of a here's what it is. And I don't want to say Christianity's without questions or Judaism, but certainly Islam, though, it's like, here's what it is, and if you don't like that, then you're not part of us. Hinduism certainly has an identity, but it's flexible identity. Yeah,
Well, how do you depict air or just presence? That's
I don't know.
that's an eternal question, obviously, because they're
Air
trying.
versus presence.
They're really trying to visualize something
Yeah.
that can't be visualized.
Well, that's kind of the Hindu thing, is call it whatever you want. It's all one, and that's kind of the depict it however you want, as long as it's generally in the spirit of the belief. But yeah, and part of that's kind of beautiful. Like the truth is one, the wise call it by many names. I think that's pretty cool. Like that sounds pretty wise to me. Some of the others, I'm not sure about the castes and stuff, but there's one of the things I want to say is every major religion has some truth. Otherwise, billions of people wouldn't follow it, right? And so there's definitely some reality here.
My cousin, was a Christian when I got him. Well,
Yeah.
still more or less. But he went into Buddhism because they didn't have church, but they would meet like once a week
Sure.
and have discussions about everything.
Yeah, or
And he-
meditation groupings or
And he
whatever.
liked the idea of discussing
Yeah.
what was happening, so.
Yep. Yeah, and if you want a very open-minded thing, the Eastern religions sometimes have been more places of that. Now, I've met some
Yeah.
very open-minded Christian groups too. Maybe we're kind of an open-minded Christian group. I don't know, but there also have been some. No, this is the way it is. Then again, you'll see on the news a group of radical Hindus attacking Muslims. So there's always your extremists, every
Yeah.
group. So I hesitate to be like, this is the open one and this is the not, because there's always nuts
They're
everywhere.
human.
Yeah. Yeah. Forms, there are many forms, but there are 4 major schools which are named after different god or goddess worships. Vaishnavism is Vishnu worship, or it's either the worship only of or the supremacy of. So this is the most important one. So which one they kind of appeal to mainly. So Vishnu worship, Shaivism, which is Shiva worship, supremacy, Shaktiism, which is, this one's interesting. It's not one goddess worship. It's, I like the lady gods all together. So goddess worship, all the lady gods. If you prefer the lady gods, that's Shaktiism. So goddess worship, supremacy, and the Smarta tradition, which is the equal worship of the 5 major deities. So that kind of there's a pantheon of the biggest ones, and they're all equally worshipped. And as I've already said, one of the things that defines it, though, is that people are really tend to be pretty open, and there's no centralized authority. There's no pope. There are different schools, but there's no one school. Different schools hold different positions on things like polytheism, caste, diet. Hindu eating cows, being vegetarians. Some Hindus are vegetarians, some are not. For this reason, some argue Hinduism is not an individual faith, but an array of similar beliefs and practices. Take your pick. I don't know how to square that knot, or no, that's not square that circle. Cut that knot. Yeah. And then I wanted to end just with some of the challenges which we've already been discussing, but kind of center on those again. So one of the challenges in Hinduism has been class-based oppression, especially in India, which is the ranking of humans within a karma hierarchy is not just a theoretical practice. It often has taken on real life ramifications that are devastating if you're in a lower caste, where you're just cut off from things. Those on the bottom of the hierarchy can be ostracized. They might be despised. You're low and you deserve to be treated badly because you're this, look what you must have done to end up there. They've been denied rights and opportunities. Moreover, part of the teaching that's so pernicious about a really strong caste view is that misery is your rightful punishment. So you lack even the justification to fight back or to push against it, because that would be pushing against the thing that you deserve and maybe make you even lower or keep you down there. And so it's this pernicious, you're down and you need to stay down and don't try to get up because this is what you have going. Maybe a response to that from some Hindus would be some Hindus reject caste, so Gandhi and others. So that's to be acknowledged. We already talked about patriarchy. We could debate whether that's the religion or the culture, but just extreme forms of patriarchy. We talked about you'll still hear about it now again in a little village, a woman burning herself to death when her husband dies, or honor killings, which isn't just a Hindu thing, but you've embarrassed the family, we can kill you because you're a woman and you've brought dishonor on the family. And then I just thought of one that there was a lady in my seminary who was actually from India originally, had lived here a while. She had grown up in a Hindu tradition, and she was actually fairly negative about Hinduism. And her criticism was that because it's so flexible and there's like a God for everything, that she said it's less of a thing that calls people out of themselves and their own, smallness and greed and what they want to be true, and more of design your religion whatever you want. You want to be rich, get your idol of prosperity. You want to have lots of sex, get your fertility, just find the God you want to find. And so that it's not really leading you to any one thing. It's so open that it's, when you're for everything, you're kind of for nothing. And so that was her criticism, that you create a God in your own image. Maybe some would respond, well, you could twist any religion in selfish ways, including Christianity. But those were a couple of the things that I thought of just like, when you see, again, every religion is going to have these pitfalls. Those are some of the pitfalls. So that's the presentation. And I just wanted to, I know if you have to go, feel free, but love to have a discussion for anyone who wants to stay around. Questions, thoughts, what you found most compelling, what you found most challenging. Is it different to Christianity? Is it the same? Is it a little bit of both? Is it a path to God? Yeah. So lots of things. I invite you to take whatever you want from that menu if you want to stay for the discussion. Yes,
I'm talking again.
you are.
So in Hinduism, you could pick what did you call them? You didn't call them gods. All these different people.
Gods, deities,
Like
whatever.
deities. You could just pick, like I like one with money and with sex and with power.
Yeah.
And those would be mine, and I could just pick the ones I
Well,
wanted.
the sex
I'm sure
ones
there would
were
be
thought
teachers
that
who
way.
say that's the wrong way to go about it, but I'll say yes. You could. I mean, you
Well,
could.
yeah, that's
And there's not one authority, so who's going to stop you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could just pick out the ones that you like.
Well, that was her criticism of the faith, is it opens the door to that because it's so multifaceted that it's not pointing in any one way.
To be more gratifying than looking back at, what you needed versus what you wanted.
Notice the hippies liked it.
I wasn't a hippie,
Hippie's
but
got
I
some
was in
things
that
right.
generation.
Yeah, but they got some things
Well,
right.
I tell you, I get all of my Hinduism from George Harrison, you know.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Hari, Krishna. Yeah.
That's what I know.
But don't all religions kind of do that? Because it's human, right?
Yes.
So you have the Christians with the prosperity gospel.
Yes,
You know, I deserve
a
this
great example of
private plane.
the Christian version of the exact same.
Yeah,
thing.
or when you just pick and choose and whatever fits what your thought is,
Right,
whether you want to put somebody down or you want to, whatever it is, you
Right.
can justify all that.
Or the ones that are a deprivation kind of mentality.
and I guess the only pushback of someone who wanted to be critical and maybe imagining this lady, she say, yeah, but Hinduism invites you to do that, whereas Christianity asks you to choose one. But we could debate that, because I'm sure there are some yogis who would say, no, there is a path and there may be lots of realities, but it's still pointing towards the one absolute. So, but yeah, that's, anyone could twist anything if they really want to. Yeah.
Because it seems like karma would probably have to be defined on something, and the question is, with doing that, how does that affect your karma, I would imagine?
Well, actually, and you just looked it up. I think, I didn't think to mention it, but another challenge of Hinduism, which also permeates versions of Christianity and maybe any faith, is, oh, you have cancer. What did you do wrong?
Yeah,
That can be pretty pernicious too.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't believe that's true, which I don't, so it's
Or you
like,
lost a baby.
yeah. So not only do
or
you,
like Jerry
feel-
Falwell said after Katrina.
yes, yeah, the gays did it or something, yeah.
Yeah,
So
just
again,
because that whole society was sinful, so you know,
Yeah.
God's paying you back.
So maybe there's an element everywhere. It's very strong in Hinduism, though. You have to say it's particularly strong in Hinduism, is that sense of you get what you deserve. kind of
Well, and
thing.
that's
So-
the reincarnation loop that you get into, because you ultimately turn into the fly. Well, you can still get worse than that. You could be the cockroach.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So just
You're
go
not
be,
the
don't be,
cockroach.
don't complain, because it could always be worse.
Get worse.
Well, and then there is no acceptance. And if you're always seeking another direction.
Yeah, I mean, a certain form of it can be pretty judgmental, so. Yeah. And what do you see a same path, different path, a partially same and partially different? What do you see in terms of religious paths? In Hinduism, maybe you don't know all the world religions, but you know Christianity a bit. What would you say on that?
I'm with Diane, our head's going to explode.
One of the major differences is that it doesn't appear that there's a particular leader, a worldly leader, certainly in Judaism and Christianity in particular Jesus, but
Yes.
certainly Judaism,
No big
Moses and
prophet,
Abraham
right.
and
That's true.
and prophets. You have an example of what to do, and there doesn't seem like, from what you're saying, that there's really a earthly example. It's more.
I don't think there's like a
right.
one unified or even a limited unified, like the patriarchs Moses, or Jesus or Muhammad. There's
Yeah.
less of this, here's the guy or here's the core collection. There are some myth stories but yeah, I don't think you notice the four major versions. None of them were like, we worship or we follow this guy. Yeah,
I guess
Doug's
I see.
saying.
Doug, yes. Yes, hi, Doug.
I'm in, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in a Bible study right now where we are, interestingly enough, discussing the concept of in our nation and world of being spiritual but not religious. You've heard people say this: I'm spiritual but I'm not religious. And what does that mean? And I think it's really we've kind of, as a group, determined this a lot of times, that spiritual, if I'm spiritual not religious, means that we do design our own God. And so there's a mix. Of course, religious people are spiritual, but or hopefully, but also there's a mix, I think, of religion and spirituality together. But when somebody is purely spiritual and not religious, it really kind of gives them a blank page.
It means they
So it's
don't
kind of-
tithe.
Yeah, they don't tithe. Yeah. So I think in Christianity, our nation has moved that direction too, a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think it's a surprise. And again, there's probably very communitarian forms of stuff, of all religions, but I don't think it's a surprise that in a highly individualistic society, Eastern religions have appealed, because it gives you a little more permission to just go do your own spiritual thing. And it asks less of you in terms of you need to get in a community, You need to all move together in helping the poor. I don't want to say no Hindus help the poor. I don't want to say no Hindus get in community, but it's just a little less of that type of thing than say the Abrahamic religions, for instance.
So
So
you don't
I think
have-
you're exactly right. It kind of works with individualism pretty well.
You don't have a rigid theology per se.
No, not per se. Yeah. Yeah. You have maybe a school of ideas, but not a, here's the one thing. Yeah.
With the Hindus, am I correct saying that you can work your way to the top?
Yeah, the idea is over time you can rise in the caste system,
Not if you're a fly.
but not in this life. You gotta wait till you die.
So through your good deeds, you can get there eventually.
Correct.
Through reincarnation.
But part of that might include if you're in a really bad position, just being quiet and accepting your lowly suffering because that's what you deserve. So it can be a tough deal, you know, in what that looks like. Or if you're really in a good place, it's like, good, just enjoy it because you deserve it. And, you know, Elon Musk must have been a great guy in his past life because look how rich that's kind of the layman's terms version of it.
It almost strikes me as sounding like, an elaborate game of shoots and ladders. I mean, it's colorful and you can do things and get here and here, but if there's a wrong step, now you're back down here. And
Yes.
I could just almost picture it as like I said, an elaborate, colorful game of shoots and ladders.
Yes. So let me end with this. So next week we're gonna go to Buddhism, and we're gonna hear a lot of common ground because Buddhism grew out of Hinduism. It was in a way a reform movement that became its own thing. What we're gonna see is Hinduism's actually fairly open in terms of worldly enjoyment and pleasure. Like you heard, it's part of the four paths. Even some temples have like wild adult rated scenes on the facades of them. Buddhism is like ascetic Hinduism, but with no gods, you know, and some other things too. But it's more of a no, don't go enjoy it and live a good life. Deny yourself, detach yourself. And so we're going to see where some of this idea of, oh, there's too much of this, everything goes, and too much worldliness takes us to another Eastern religion, which has some commonality, but also treads a different path somewhat. And I guess any final questions or
So are
comments?
you stepping through the religions from most prolific to least prolific?
Just oldest to newest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oldest to
and we
newest.
could probably debate actually if Judaism or Buddhism is older, but I'm just gonna do Buddhism because it's kind of related to it. Yeah. Yeah, and then we'll do Judaism after,
from
and
a
then we'll stop with
prolific-
Islam.
Is Hinduism relatively the most prolific coming out of the largest or
I think
population?
the largest is Christianity. I think the second
Okay.
is Islam. I don't know between Hinduism. I mean, there's a lot of Indian people, and I could suppose it depends on how many of them are Hindu. You know, I'm sure not every single one of them, but I
Okay.
think a lot of them are. So I'm sure, I would imagine it has over 1 billion practitioners. Yeah. We could look that up maybe for next time. just how-
Judaism is probably the smallest.
I think almost certainly so. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Especially
Interesting.
nowadays.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Okay, well, I'll say a prayer with you and then we'll be on our way. God, we thank you for your spirit, which appears to people throughout time and throughout the world in different ways. Sometimes it's hard to map out where your voice is, where it isn't. And we just pray that your spirit would be among us so that wherever we find wisdom in life, we might learn from it. Wherever we hear things that are not helpful, we can know where we stand, and that we would know that over it all, you're a God who loves people everywhere and who speaks in miraculous ways to so many. And so speak to us through this time and in our lives in the coming week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Well, I learned that if you watch the Indian Matchmaker on Netflix, some of the requirements of those searching for a match, ask for Vishnu. Now I know what it is.
Thank you for joining us. Creed.
Hard up for
You
entertainment.
guys have a good one.
sometimes.
Bye, Valerie. Oh, that's.